This podcast is brought to you by the Heldridge Hotel, New Brunswick's only 4-star hotel and a preferred hotel of Rutgers football fans. The Heldridge helps you make the most of your game day weekend, providing premium accommodations in the cultural heart of downtown New Brunswick. Restaurants, bars, theaters, parks, museums, and more are only steps away. Whether you're traveling alone or with a large group, book your stay at the Heldridge and make the most of your game day weekend. Visit theheldridge.com today.
Save on Cox Internet when you add Cox Mobile and get fiber-powered internet at home and unbeatable 5G reliability on the go. So whether you're playing a game at home,
Yes, cool.
or attending one live, you can do more without spending more. Learn how to save at cox.com/internet. Cox Internet is connected to the premises via coaxial cable. Cox Mobile runs on the network with unbeatable 5G reliability as measured by Ookla LLC in the U.S. 2H 2023. Results may vary, not an endorsement. Other restrictions apply.
From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politi and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant, the Groundhog's Day of college sports podcast. I'm your host, Phil Connors. You guys even know what that movie is? Tell me you've seen No. Everything I've done here, it's been a waste. You have not seen Groundhog's Day. I'm done. That's it. Thanks for coming, folks. We'll be back tomorrow, same time. I got you, babe. All right. Let's talk about this game. Groundhog's Day, and it kind of feels that way for me. This is the way the season's been. Lost to Michigan State at Madison Square Garden. You know, that we talked about going in, and this was sort of like the last chance, the last opportunity to stick your flag in, to say we're going to have a season here. They didn't do it. They lost a close game, 7 points, great atmosphere. Doesn't matter though. You know, this is sort of the end, I think, for what this team had hoped to accomplish. And it was kind of a funeral feel to me afterward. We got to talk about the game. We got to talk about what Steve Pikiell said. Where do you want to start, Brian? Want to start with the game, maybe? I mean, it just seemed like, you know, no Dylan Harper, really no chance. Is it that simple?
Yeah, I think it's been kind of that way the whole season, right? I think once he was sitting down the rest of the game, starting with the 18:30 mark of the second half, it was kind of over from there. And I disagree that it was a close game because, well, Michigan State never blew it open. It never felt like Rutgers really had a chance there in the second half. They cut it to 7 at the end because Jordan Durkak was hitting shots from the moon, right? And having the game of his career. But other than that really weird late rally, like it always felt like Michigan State was under control. They dominated inside because Rutgers has one true center on the roster. Shocking that that's an issue for this team. And they just don't have enough scorers around Ace Bailey, who had a bad game, and Dylan Harper, who can't, tried to his credit, gave it a shot with what seems to be a pretty, bad ankle sprain after he got against Penn State. And nobody else, when they had the opportunity, stepped up, aside from Jordan Durkak, again, who had the best game of his time at Rutgers for naught, right? That's kind of a recurring theme here. Individual standout games that result in losses because no one else around them helps them out.
Yeah. Pat, it was a weird situation with and I don't know if it came across on TV, but, Dylan's in the starting lineup. He's warming up. Then he's not in the starting lineup. Then he comes out for warm-ups and his shoes aren't laced. Then he's not on the bench. And he's behind the bench by the exercise bike. And you're like, well, he's not going to play at all. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, here we go. Garden, Willis Reed. We got our moment here. He's at the scorer's bench, tying his shoes at the bench. You're watching this like, this is all right. This is a strange thing. Doesn't play well in the first half, but plays. Starts the second half, and then 90 seconds in, that's it. So it's, for a guy who practiced on Friday, it's just a very weird situation. And I don't know if it feels like maybe he just needed to take 2 weeks off and didn't do it. It's just an odd situation. Best way to describe it.
It was a made for TV moment, as you mentioned, right? Like all the drama was there. Right. Like you said, it could have been like the Willis Reed flu game for Jordan, whatever, however you want to put it. And it was bizarre. It was bizarre. And it's unfortunate that it seems to be that without Dylan Harper as the focal point of this team, it's just kind of everyone's kind of floundering. that he's been the guy at the focal point, the linchpin of this team, and the glue that holds it all together. And it's just he hasn't been able to be on the court when he tries, ineffective. So yeah, I don't know what you can do other than just rush him back. It is what it is. It's a bizarre situation, something that Rutgers is certainly, I guess, like at a loss for. I don't know. I don't really know how to put it any other way.
Tom Izzo had a good point, calling him the quarterback of the team, and he certainly makes everyone around him better just when he's going to the basket to score, and also when he's that threat, he opens things up for his teammates. So obviously it's a big loss. I agree with you, Politi. I think he probably should have taken a couple weeks off to rest so that he could be closer to 100%, because as good as he is, him at 30%, 40% is just not an effective player because he can't defend at a high level and he can't really produce offensively. That air ball on his last 3-point attempt was clear that he's just not there, right? And it's hard to blame him, right? Like he's physically not there. He can't perform. And whether it was him or someone on the staff or somebody has to kind of make the decision to sit him aside, especially now, because as we've established, the regular season chances of making the tournament are dead, right? They're not going to win 9 of the last 11 games. It's not going to happen. So if I was Steve Michael, what I would do is I would shut him down for the rest of the regular season, right? Let him heal. And I mean, assuming you're on path to make the Big Ten tournament. When it's time to make the Big Ten tournament, kind of bring him out and hope for a miracle run, because that's really the only chance they have left. I thought this was the moment this Saturday of like the 5 Rutgers fans in the fan base still left. Do you know about those Japanese soldiers who were still fighting World War II in the 70s? That those Rutgers fans have come out and they've realized that the war is over and the regular season hopes are gone. And now that's what I would do. Are they going to do that? I don't know. I can't imagine Dylan Harper's going to play Wednesday. This will he, won't he, ankle sprain. He clearly couldn't play at a high level on Saturday. I can't imagine he'll recover in 4 days, especially on a road trip. So I think he'll at least miss the Northwestern game. I'll be surprised if he plays. And I think that he should miss it, right? No matter, even if he's healthy enough to play, it's not worth risking aggravating the injury and having him play at 20%, because that's just not going to help the team either.
Yeah. And it's funny, and had a lot of spirited conversations with people because our coverage was critical and has been critical. People saying, well, look, get these, one of the best players in college basketball. He's hurt. He can't play. What do you expect? This is unfair. This is the reason. And to that, I just have to say, like, it wasn't, they weren't 11-2 when Dylan Harper got the flu, right? I mean, they had lost to Kennesaw, they had lost to Princeton, they had lost to Texas A&M, they had no-showed Ohio State. All right. I mean, I'm not expecting them to be undefeated, but we just got to put this in perspective. This team had big problems before Dylan Harper got hurt, had big problems up front before Emmanuel Gboli got hurt. I mean, there's this is just kind of, it's a symptom of it too. I mean, they're bringing him back, I think, because they recognize it. They've got no hope without him. That's maybe one reason why he's rushing himself back. It didn't work. And that led to what I can only describe as just a weird scene, right? I don't know. The press conference afterward, set the stage for you. You're at the Garden, sitting there in the room where you usually have the Knicks have their press conferences, and Steve Pikiell's behind the podium next to Ace Bailey and Jordan Durkheim, who said his career game there. And I asked the question. I said, I think a lot of Rutgers fans are shocked. Are you at all shocked? Are you surprised? And he interrupted me to answer it, and it was just, for me, just a very, I don't know, tone deaf, like a best way to describe it, like, just reciting his resume. Like, I'm glad fans have high expectations now. We were nowhere. Now we went to 2 tournaments, went to the NIT. And then he said the line that I think if this doesn't turn around, it's going to be stamped on his career obituary when he says, we've got a 3.2 team GPA. I mean, people, and I got that forwarded to me about a dozen times from people. Did Pikiell really bring up his GPA? Like, I got that from fans, from sports writers who only sort of dialed in, from fans, from other, just people who saw that were just like, what? And really, I mean, I'm kind of with them. Like, it's just like, nobody cares about your GPA, Steve. It's college basketball in 2025. Like, nothing else to say. It's just like, it's a professional sport now. Nobody cares.
It's just Steve Pikiell Mad Libs here, right? This is what he does when, I mean, I've been on the end, your end a couple of times, right? Where you're asking a somewhat critical question. And before you can even finish the question, he's already jumping down your throat to not let you finish it, right? It's as though if you don't ask the question, maybe we can ignore what the reality is, right? And then he answers it by completely ignoring the question. He did not answer whether he was shocked or not. And answering all the positive things he throws in. It was the same things he says at the beginning of the season in the preseason media. We have a great GPA. We have great fans. We have great team. We have great this. Look away, guys. There's no problems here. Everything is totally fine, right? And the GPA is just part of that spiel, right? You would think, though, when you realize that you have two of the most talented players this program has ever had, and you're 10-10, the least you could do is say, listen, we're in a bad spot here. We're not playing as well as we thought. It's the reality, because otherwise what he did was throw sand at everyone's face, right? You have to be the most delusional Rutgers fan, however many of them are out there, to not see the house burning down, right? So it would help him, it would help the fans, and it would help us to not feel like our intelligence is being insulted, for him just to say, yeah, it's pretty bad. I didn't expect it to get this bad, but we'll turn it around. No one's expecting him to self-flagellate up there, but at least acknowledge the reality 5 feet in front of your face, because otherwise either you look, to your point, Steve, tone deaf, out of touch, and not with the, in denial, or you are insulting what people are seeing, right? This was we made the tournament a couple years in a row spiel worked when Rutgers fans were still in the Eddie Jordan, this program will never get better mode. We are at a point in year 9 of his tenure where, because he's had those success, the expectations raise. And I don't blame him for saying this, but I think when he says that he likes the expectations of the program, I don't think that's true. I think he's having a really, really hard time dealing with these expectations, which is why whenever he's confronted with anything somewhat critical, he immediately gets very defensive, because the reality is he's falling well short of those expectations.
Where's someone to whisper in his ear and say this is not the way to handle this? And I'm like, seriously, like, why is that? Why are we still doing this? Like, you are I looked it up. You are the 26th highest paid coach in college basketball. You play in the Big Ten. You make $3.5 million a year. Like, you were signed through 2031. You have one job here. It is to win college basketball games. I'm sorry. If you're worried about GPA and you want a pat on the back for going to the NIT, go back to Stony Brook. Like, I'm not saying this like he should. I like Steve Peichel. I think he's done a good job, but you've got to get that out of your head. You've got to stop talking about that. That's not what this is. The Big Ten. This is a professional basketball league now. Like, you have 2 NBA players. They're not going to get a GPA. They're not getting a degree. They're not here to, they're not going to get applied sciences. They're not going to be biology major Ace Bailey. They're going pro. I just don't understand it. Like, what? If you're a fan and you spent all that money on tickets to go to the Garden and you thought you were going to see, and a lot of them did. I talked to a lot of them who were on the fence about going. Like, I spent $1,600 on my ticket. I have to go. And this is what your great season, what your expectations are in year 9. And you have him coming in afterward telling you, well, I guess expectations are nice. We made the NIT 2 years ago. It was a bad look, Pat.
It was. And the thing is, like, what is going to become of this? Where does it go from here? And obviously we can't answer that, but it's just every loss, the downtroddenness of this super exciting season, and the lure of where this thing started, and even that little spike after UCLA and Nebraska, you're like, all right, this we can get to the finish line here, right? Like, there's enough here, but the way it's going, the injuries, everything you just said about the post-game, discussion and things that are being said around the team. It's just, there's got to be some sort of change, right? Like, you would think at some point, like, something's going to have to change here. So We'll see what happens in the offseason or whatever. But down the stretch, I mean, it's hard being so critical of a team of college kids. But as you pointed out, Steve, this is the new era of college athletics, and it's so different than the 3.2 GPA. Like, those are not the measuring sticks anymore, right? I think that's what you're seeing across the country, and that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
between Steve Peichel and his top lieutenant, Brandon Knight, they're paying $4 million for those two guys. Brandon Knight is making more money than maybe any other assistant coach in college basketball, certainly in the top 10. And I've heard that he is supposed to, coordinate the offense. What offense are we seeing aside from high ball screens and isolation attacks, right? Like this, they are, I think, 65th nationally in offensive efficiency with two of the best scorers in college basketball, right? Like, I'm sorry, like you're paying a lot of money for these guys. Yes, they earn some of the money by getting the kids here, but what value do you have in recruiting two NBA players to your roster when you're 10-10 after 20 games? I mean, they're almost in as worth a spot as last year, right? Like it, and Noah Fernandes, good kid. He's nowhere near the point guard Dylan Harper is. And Gavin Griffiths, good kid, nowhere near the wing that Ace Bailey is. So listen, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't be paid the 25th highest salary in the country. You can't be, a team competing in the Big Ten with two NBA players and then get sensitive when your team is stinking it up and people are talking about it, right? This is the reality. And I think unless they turn it around, they're going to have to get used to the reality that this will be seen as the biggest failure in Rutgers athletics history. I have a hard time believing any other. And one of the biggest failures in college basketball, right? At least in the 21st century. That's just it's going to be sticking with them for a long time. We'll talk about changes in the offseason, but clearly, as Steve wrote in his column, they need a GM. They need an offensive coordinator, a coach that can at least create some semblance of an offense. And there's going to need to be some changes just in the way the hiring process, the people around the program, just a bunch of wholesale changes.
The portal evaluation, like there's just got to be. He's got to modernize his program, and you're right. We've got plenty of time to talk about this, but I mean, just off the bat, he's going to have to accept this. And I don't know if he's going to. Like, I'd be very interested. And I don't know if he's going to. And I don't know currently if there's someone who's going to make him if he doesn't. And those are two very concerning things for me. For if you have a coach who believes this is the way I do it. This is the way we made the NIT 2 years ago. If you've got someone who honestly believes like everything's fine, like if he cannot look at this and say, hey, what I was doing worked in 2019. This is a completely different sport in 2025. If he can't see that and adapt, he's screwed. There's no other way to put it. This is a failure. He will get fired by the next AD in 2 years. That's the only. I mean, I hate to say it, but this can't go on. You can't. There's no other place in the world that tolerates this like Rutgers does. We're good. Well, you did make the NIT 2 years. No, in another place they'd be already up in arms. They'd be already going crazy. Think about this 2 years from now. Another 2 years like this.
All right. Now, I do want to emphasize one thing really quick. No, not too harsh at all. I want to emphasize this one thing because this discussion has been kind of going backwards, I think, right? The idea that you can't build a team by collecting under-recruited freshmen and developing them into seniors, right? It's certainly harder in this age. Steve Peichel had 2 or 3 recruiting classes to build that base, and it was just filled with misses, right? Yeah. If he had hit on any of these kids, Jaden Jones, Derek Simpson, Gavin Griffiths, Antoine Wolfolk, Oscar Palmquist, if he had hit on any of those kids, you'd have these fifth-year seniors that have been in the program for 4 to 5 years that probably wouldn't get poached, and they would be that foundation to play next to these freshmen. And if you had been able to keep the 2 guys you developed that actually fit perfectly on this team, in Mawat Mag and Cliff O'Mori, you'd have those fifth-year seniors that are the foundation for this team, right? So it's not – yes, I don't disagree that it's harder to do it that way in this day and age, but they did the hard part, which is getting the talented freshmen or transfer portal kids in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. They didn't do the part that apparently they're really good at, which is finding these underrated gems and developing them. They completely missed on that aspect, right? That's probably where they failed the most, right? And they had to fail in the portal because they failed in developing these high school kids. So I don't want to hear about that. And I'm tired of hearing that you can't win with freshmen. The 2 freshmen are the last reason this team isn't winning. They're winning in spite of the freshmen. Or sorry, I should say because of the freshmen. Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey are the only reason this team isn't 0-20. Okay. So I'm tired of people saying they can't win with freshmen and all this stuff. Okay. John Calipari wasn't winning with freshmen, but he had like 5-star freshmen. His whole team was built on that. Rutgers is not winning because they didn't develop high school kids and they failed in the portal. Someone asked me this yesterday. I'll put this question to you guys. If Steve Peichel had the opportunity again, and he was asked before the season, do you want to have Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey again? Would you run it back? Would you take those 2 kids on your roster? Would you say yes, or would you say no thanks? I'm back. I'm better with my old ways of having these, under-recruited guys that are growing into seniors. I guess the question is, if you could do it all over again and you're Steve Peichel, would you take Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper?
Are you asking me as Steve Peichel, or are you asking me as what I would do? Is the question.
If you're Steve Pike, I guess you can answer it both ways. I think the answer is
I wonder
is the same.
I do wonder if Steve Pikel's answer might be I don't know to that because of all the headaches that went with it. Of course, I mean the answer, logically speaking, is yes. A million times yes. You've got to take that shot. You've got to do it. Yes, but I mean, I don't think Steve Pikel's enjoying this. Pat, what do you think? What's your answer?
Of course, you do it again, right? This is you can clearly see that the talent and the projections of these two kids are through the roof, right? Like that hasn't changed one bit. So of course you do it. And what if this went the way that everyone hoped it might, that Rutgers was going to be this great team? These two guys would have been the most celebrated college athletes in a generation. The two kids that went to this, underdog story to really pull Rutgers out to take Rutgers to the next level. So yeah, I think you absolutely do it again, and it would have been a story for the ages if it went the other way. So yeah, no question.
My only point, the answer is yes, a billion times yes. And the only reason is this: doing it the old way, developing young guys, that gets you to a certain point. Like at its best, you could have a team like 2021 where you could maybe make a run to the Final Four if everything goes right. You can't win a national championship unless you have a Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey on your team. You just can't. Those guys raise the ceiling so much more than the other way. So you got to take that chance. I think the idea that you would say no to that is absurd.
All right. We're going to talk more basketball when we take questions. We have to just get to the other big development at the Garden is that Rutgers got a football recruit. I was thinking about this, like if in normal times, if this team was good and Greg Schiano stole the best running back out of South Carolina out of the SECs and did it at halftime of a major national TV game for the basketball team, people would be like, I can't believe he's trying to upstage the basketball team. Instead, because the season is bad, it's like, okay, Greg, please upstage the basketball. Can you come out at halftime too with a couple of border collies and a Frisbee to continue distracting from the basketball team? But yeah, I mean, it's just, he's having a great offseason. Can tell us about the running back. What do we know about this kid?
He's a highly ranked running back from the South, and he picked Rutgers over local teams like South Carolina and Clemson and a lot of other SEC teams that were, sniffing around. And I think that is the latest showing of them, one, broadening their recruiting footprint, and two, becoming a more attractive option. Again, I think the revenue sharing and the pot of money they have at their disposal certainly helps that. Would they have gotten this kid a year ago? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that they're building a really solid foundation for this recruiting class.
Jalen McGill, just in case you hadn't seen the name. I'm curious, 16th best running back in his class, according to 24/7. I am curious. The one thing I will say, you talk about the money that comes in the pot, the house settlement, if they're spending that or not. I mean, it's interesting if they are using that money on incoming recruits. I think that is sort of a strategic decision that I wouldn't have guessed would have been what Greg Schiano's doing. We of course have absolutely no idea because all that stuff is kept pretty much by the vest. But anyway, Pat, for someone who's covered recruiting,
I was just going to say, like, recruiting is all optics, and it depends on what perspective you're looking at. You can sell the brightest spots of any recruit. It's the thing that gets fans the most high and low on earth, right? It's the same reason the NFL draft is the spectacle that it is, right? Like this optimism of a restart or whatever. So, Rutgers has been great at the position, though, and that's a great thing to sell to recruits. And it's probably a big reason why he wanted to come to Rutgers. So I think it's the Greg Schiano has just continued to build momentum, and I think that's really the story here. Whether it's the transfer portal or recruits, it like everything. There's an upward trajectory and stability, and that's really, really what matters.
Yeah. He gets another 2 weeks. Isaiah Pacheco in the Super Bowl, another 2 weeks of one of the three best salesmen of the program ever will be now on the stage in New Orleans. Sorry, didn't mean to drop Brian, but yeah.
No. You're exactly right. Because my point was going to be, if you don't think that they didn't send that video of Isaiah Pacheco getting the key first down at the end of the Bills game last night to every running back within a 300-mile radius of campus, you're crazy, right? So this is between Pacheco and Munungai, they have two building blocks of recruiting proven talent they've developed in the program to sell to these kids. And I'm sure that is, a big selling point here. Just like with the wide receiver from Pennsylvania, a big selling point for him was Ian Strong, KJ Duff came in and played as freshmen and already two of the best players on this team. So, and listen, it's not to say that revenue sharing is the entire reason they're getting this kid, because you're right. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But one, revenue sharing on freshmen, on high school kids is different because that money's deferred till 26 at least, right? So you can figure that out down the line. And two, you still have to recruit talented high school kids to build a base, right? If you're going to build a program off retention of talented kids that you develop, you first got to get the kids to develop, right? And it's much better to develop a 4-star top 20 at his position player than it is these low 3 stars, right? So, and to the point about, I was surprised there wasn't more fanfare at the Garden. I thought once the news kind of trickled out, there'd be a bit of a fan explosion, but I guess people were either getting more beer to kind of get through the second half or just didn't check their phones. But it was, I heard buzz before the game that it might happen during the game. I just thought it was a classic, Greg Schiano, always be selling, always be closing, kind of buzz gathering move there.
Give him credit. All right, let's grab some questions. Got a lot of them this time from the Discord and from Twitter. Thanks, guys. You program our podcast. We appreciate it. All right, this one came up a bunch. Thoughts on playing at MSG? I would love them to play there as much as possible, but more for out of conference. No need to give up a conference game at the RAC. But we have a great school to come and play at the MEC. It would be great. Couldn't possibly agree more. I think they should play there every year. I think it's a selling point for the program. Obviously if there's 17,000 fans, there are 14,000 of them were Rutgers fans probably. It was a great crowd. The place was juiced at the start of the game. I do think you need a Michigan State. You need an opponent like that. You can't play Wagner there. you need a real team. You give me a Gonzaga, give me a Premier, a Duke, someone like that. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, and I will say this to take it one step further. I think this schedule been the perfect schedule for basketball. You playing a Vegas tournament, you play a really good home slate, you play one game in the Garden. Steve Pike will never do it again, though. There's my analysis. He did not sound enthusiastic about coming back here.
He brought up the fact it's the toughest schedule they've had so far, and I looked it up. It's significantly harder, both non-conference and Big Ten. They're scheduled, or they're projected to play the hardest schedule in the Big Ten by Bart Torfield, really? Right? So yes, which not great luck, right? When it rains, it pours. But yeah, of course. I agree. The non-conference, they could probably avoid playing a road game at Kennesaw State, maybe play Princeton home and home. Otherwise, I agree with you. The Garden, they should absolutely play at least one game at the Garden every year. It's great for the fans that live in New York or don't really make their way to the RAC regularly. It's a great environment. People get fired up. In the few moments where Rutgers was playing really well, that place was absolutely electric. And it's a selling point. You're on national TV. You got kids from New York watching the game, paying attention, right? The New York Post was sitting next to us, the AP, ESPN, guys that aren't going to go to Piscataway.
Dwight Howard. We had some Knicks in the building. It was it was a real
random stuff happens that would not happen at the RAC. Now, here's what I would say. I would like them to play a marquee non-conference game there. Reporting from Jerry Carino was that Syracuse was apparently a team they had discussed playing there. That's a perfect opponent. I would love, and I don't think this opponent would say no, Rutgers UConn at the Garden. Steve Peichel, Dan Hurley, national championship team. I don't think they'll play it because that's pretty much a guaranteed loss for Rutgers. But I think the buzz would be absurd. That would be a great opponent. Duke, I think, would be a great opponent. I don't know if that can be worked out, but that would be a great opponent. I would like that to happen. I don't think Steve Peichel, who clearly is not trying to elevate the strength of his non-conference schedule, would be up to it. But if you give me Rutgers UConn at the Garden next year, that place will have 25,000. I don't know what the capacity is in that building. There will be 25,000 people in there, and there might be fistfights in the stands, which is what I want to see.
Step one was getting into a major invitational, right?
Yeah.
Think about if Rutgers didn't play in Las Vegas, where was it headed, Brian? What was Plan B?
I think it was not the Cayman Islands, one of these Bahamas or one of these.
Right. So Rutgers checked a box there. That was step one. So I think having another option there, right, is a good thing for Rutgers. We could dream about all these scenarios all we want, but at the end of the day, with the two best players that they're probably going to have in a generation, right? The selling point for Rutgers is not going to be as good as it was this year, right? Obviously. So that's the hard part of scheduling Duke at Madison Square Garden for what's the juice there for down the road. I don't know.
Right. This was the year, because next year when they stink, it's going to be a net negative for UConn, because either you beat a bad team at the Garden or you lose to Rutgers and it's a Q3 loss or whatever. So I agree there. So it feels like a missed opportunity this year. Not to. I mean, UConn will play anybody. They'll play anybody anywhere, right? So they're in that select group of teams: UConn, Illinois, Alabama, who will play you on the freaking moon if they have to. But it didn't work out, and you're right. But a guy can dream, Pat.
I know. Listen, I'm not here to crush dreams. Step one was getting into like Rutgers to be in Vegas. You guys wrote about it extensively, and that was a huge step for the program, right? Like no question. I remember talking last year about, well, they need to up the schedule, right? They did that and everything. So the boxes were checked from a scheduling standpoint is the point I'm trying to make.
And they'll be there next year. They're contractually set to be there next year, barring a extinction of the contract, which is certainly always possible. I don't think that's going to happen. They'll be in Vegas at least one more year, maybe 2 more years.
He needs that money for the NIL, so they have to go back next year. They have to.
No, I would say that it would be the other side that says Rutgers is a little stinky. Let me get him out of this tournament.
Well, maybe,
I don't think it's going to happen. But
yeah. All right. Speaking of tournaments in Vegas. Oh, good transition. Someone asked, and this has been out there, and this is one of those news to me situations, but the College Crown Tournament, is that a realistic destination for Rutgers? If you don't know what the College Crown Tournament is, it is the new NIT. Is that the best way to put it? Brian, any idea? Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So Fox Sports, in conjunction with, I believe, the same people that set up the tournament in Vegas in November that Rutgers was at, are creating a competitor to the NIT, essentially, where it is the continuation of the sport wanting to have more Power 5 teams together so they have better TV games to sell to the partners or whatever, right? It's essentially a ploy to have Big Ten teams that don't make the tournament play each other here instead of the NIT. The tournament is set up this way. There's 16 teams. There are 2 automatic qualifiers from the Big East, the Big 12, and the Big 10. All the bigs, right? So that's 6 teams. And then you have 10 more at-large bids, which I believe all go to high major teams of those 3 leagues. So would Rutgers qualify for that? That's an interesting question because you think, let's say the Big 10 gets 8 teams in, right? Then they have 2 automatic qualifiers. Rutgers is still like 15th, right? Currently.
Right. So they don't have to pick Nebraska, do they? They don't have to pick Northwestern. They don't want to.
Right?
Right.
They can pick whoever they want, but why would they pick Rutgers? Presumably without Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, there's no shot. They're playing in the college basketball crown, right? I don't see why they would do that. Why would they do that? What's the point of risking injury to play in a meaningless tournament?
I guess so. They're basketball players, though. You never know.
I mean, you never know. I would bet my life savings that they would not play in that tournament. I don't see a scenario why they would. But even then, I don't think Rutgers is in position right now to qualify for it. So they would probably end up in the NIT, which I believe is still is now the CBI essentially.
Right. Yeah, but they're not going to qualify for the NIT. I mean, they're 10-10. They've got 11 games left. Right. I mean, we've gone through this. They're not getting. I would be stunned if they're over 500.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it would be a good accomplishment, something to play for.
Amazing accomplishment. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Something to play for. College Crown. I mean, a couple of months ago, we were talking about what's the future of bowl games in football, and this trip to Phoenix, Arizona, something good or bad for the program? What would the College Crown at this point be for this program? That's a whole nother debate we could get into for a long time, but
fascinating. Something. Yeah. Back to Vegas. That's what would be good for us, certainly. Maybe not good for Brian's wallet. Could be going tilt on him. Got to go back to that blackjack table and at the MGM.
I leave my ATM card back in New Jersey. I also lost an AirPod at the gift shop at the MGM Grand. Maybe I'll go back over there and pick it up. I'm sure it's still somewhere there on the floor.
Surprised you got into plane with a shirt, much less your wallet. All right. Well, another thing. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the College Crown Tournament. I'll be doing some research. I did notice Jordan Bazant is involved in that heavily. I believe he was Steve Pikiell's agent. Could be wrong about that.
And Chris Ash's agent. Oh, no. Pat Hobbs' agent.
Pat Hobbs' agent. Yes. So I don't know if Pat Hobbs still has him as an agent. Anyway, moving on. Bunch of questions more about Dylan and Ace's situation. With a rough ankle injury, what are the odds that Dylan Harper shuts himself down for the season, given the dismal team performance? To get back to 100%, he will need a week so we get healthy. Is it worth aggravating or making the ankle worse with meaningful games left? Someone took that to the next step with Ace. Do you see a point where Dylan and Ace stop playing to avoid risk of injury? The downside of playing meaningless games in mid-February is pretty high. I don't know. We have not encountered this from a basketball standpoint. I do think Dylan Harper should we said it earlier, should and probably will for a while, I'm guessing. We don't have any information, but it seems like he will shut down until he's healthy. Ace Bailey, though, is healthy. So he's a basketball player. I mean, there's a risk associated with playing. I haven't seen no signs that he is going to shut it down. He played 38 minutes against Michigan State. What do you think?
I asked Ace Bailey this after one of the home losses. Like, if this team is not trending to the NCAA tournament, do you still plan on playing out the rest of the season? And he said yes. Right now, it's one thing to just say that, to a reporter after a game and a question you're probably not expecting. It's another to live through it. I believe him, right? I will choose to believe him. Dylan Harper is an interesting situation because you have the calculus of, one, is it worth re-aggravating an injury and hurting yourself before NBA draft prep? And two, is it worth playing at 20% and putting bad tape out there? He's put a lot of bad tape out there in January, like a lot of bad tape.
Right.
And if I was advising him, I would tell him to sit out the rest of the season. That's what I would do, purely from a not selfish, but like a personal NBA draft goal. Now, what are the odds he shuts it down for the rest of the year? I put it at 20% in the sense that it is a possibility, certainly, as it always is with these high-level kids that are in a tricky situation. But clearly, he's been trying to play, right? He played at 20% at the flu 2 games. He played a Saturday at the Garden despite his ankle not being right. So clearly, he wants to play. So if it's up to Dylan Harper, I think he'll be back on the court as soon as he feasibly can. Now, Dylan Harper isn't a regular player. He has a lot of people in his circle who probably have differing opinions here. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, to your point, like speculation, I would be surprised if he plays against Northwestern. It's probably too soon after the injury. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play against Michigan. Again, it's a week out from hurting his ankle again and aggravating it. Will he shut it down for the rest of the season? If I was to bet right now, I do think Dylan Harper will play again for Rutgers.
Yeah,
if he shuts it down, I would not be shocked.
Yeah. And Pat, I don't think we say put bad film out there. Like, I don't think anything that happened this season is going to change NBA scouts' opinions of what Dylan Harper is as a.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question. Like, in what world, how do you evaluate what's going on with Dylan Harper? You can see that he's not right. You can see when he's at his best, and right, it's obviously. Yeah, there
saw the Alabama game.
He's
right?
ailing. On TV, you could see his ankle turn. He's not faking any injury or anything like that. So the question is, clearly, if you're an NBA scout or an NBA franchise or an owner or something, you would probably say, this kid's out there, he's working his butt off to try to actually will this team, to will himself on the court and will his team. That's probably a positive. So at some point, I think that would be a good thing for him to be back on the court. And if he maybe needs a game or 2 or 2 weeks, whatever it is, to not put out bad tape, but just to once again show what this kid is what this kid can do, because it is phenomenal when he's at his best.
Absolutely, he's a prideful kid. Yeah, he's a prideful kid. Exactly. He doesn't want this to be the memory of him in college. He wants to go out and have So I think that's why we're going to see him again, and we're going to see him again at his best. All right. Speaking of questions, we got a lot. About Steve Pikiell's leash /contract /future. Everyone's talking about it, and it's message board stuff. Here's one. How long is Steve Pikiell's leash with a new athletic director eventually hired at the end of the school year? Lucky for him, his contract runs through 2031. Another parting gift from Pat Hobbs. Since everyone's talking about firing Pike in Fantasyland, if he left or was fired, who would be a realistic long shot? And what other options do we have? Just tell me who can avoid the up and coming. I think we probably should not waste our time on speculating who will replace Steve Pikiell. He's not going to get replaced. Signed through 2031. You did the math on this, Brian, right? Like the buyouts reduced to something like manageable, $5 million. But if Rutgers were to fire him, they'd owe that money.
If they were to fire him, they'd owe him the rest of his salary through the life of his contract, which if it happened after this season would be $24 million. That's not happening. That's not happening, right?
Yeah. And even, to be sure, we're pointing this out not because we think he should be fired, because of how ridiculous it is. I'm sorry, go on. Yes.
Well, we're talking about it because people are talking about it. And the fact they are talking about it is a bad sign for Steve Pikiell. He's losing, as we've said many times, all the goodwill he built. Now, I think that one catastrophic season is not going to cause him to get fired after he's the one man that finally took this program to the NCAA tournament. But I will say that, maybe not after next season, but after 2 seasons, if things aren't getting better, you have a new AD who has no emotional attachment to you, right? And probably going to have a lot of pressure to make some changes, right? Then that could happen. What I would say is I don't think Steve Pikiell's tenure at Rutgers ends with him being fired. I can see Steve Pikiell, being the way a traditional coach he is, clearly just frustrated and frazzled by the season, as anyone would be, right? There's a lot of pressure on his head. and a lot of attention at how bad a job he's doing, I could totally see him following the footsteps of Jay Wright, who was at practice on Friday, or Tony Bennett, guys that were at one time really good coaches, see the modern landscape and say, I can't do this. So he either retires, which he's probably a little young for that, or goes down to a Yale or a Stony Brook or a lower level, or even a high school. Like, I think Steve Pike will be the greatest high school coach of all time. That's his wheelhouse. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I'm not saying I've heard that he will do that. I'm saying I could totally see that being a realistic possibility because, he was pulling his hair out before, during the regular times of college basketball. I can't imagine another offseason or two of dealing with agents and NIL and transfer portal and roster management is going to be something he wants to do.
I'd be stunned if that happened. Yeah. Pat,
but that's the fascinating question of what is college athletics in a year or two from now. And right, the Ivy League has already said we're not going into this crazy world of opting in and experimenting with this revenue sharing. Like, we want no part of it. Right, what happens to the Big East schools, right? Like Seton Hall has already said we're going all in. We're going to try to do this, but like the reality of it, what does that situation create? And it's just so fascinating. Like, it's still such a big question mark at Rutgers. How is Rutgers approaching this? And until like these questions get answered, like, it's really just going to be a fascinating, all speculation. And we could come on this podcast and be like, we know, this contract situation and that, and how this is going to affect recruiting. Like, you just don't know. You don't know what are high school kids thinking? Like, what happens to just a high school basketball player anymore, right? Like, there are just so many big picture questions of college athletics in the next year or two. And it's really, really just fascinating stuff.
The next change, going to the house money to having $3 million to work with is a change that'll make it a little easier for him, Brian, you think? Or
Sure. You'll have a dedicated pot of money to work with and not, though the excuse of not having enough money is kind of out of the window there. You're not going to have the money to compete with, the Oregons who have the NIL money on top of the revenue share, but you do have a bigger pot to work with. Then the question will be a matter of, do you trust him to evaluate players in the portal, roster management, finding good fits, all that stuff? That's another question for another day. But again, to put a bow on this conversation, I don't think Steve Peichel is going anywhere. I would be stunned if he's not the head coach of Rutgers men's basketball next fall or next winter or whatever. And again, I don't think he'll be fired. One, because the new AD is going to come in and fire the still beloved head basketball coach. And two, I think that he probably deserves another shot to redeem himself from this. But certainly, if you asked me a year ago, would Steve Peichel's seat ever be hot at Rutgers? I would say it would take extraordinary circumstances. The extraordinary circumstances are here, and his seat is not hot, but certainly, barring a miraculous turnaround, next year it'll be a little warm.
Absolutely. Totally agree. All right. It's a couple more questions. We have one from Rocco wants to know, do you know of any new or improvements to the football facilities plan for this year? I understand that SHI is in need of repairs and improvements. I think, Rocco, that Greg Shano agrees with you. Hey, hang on. Let me get out the list here. Be like, you never see the gifs where where they get the scroll and it rolls down to the floor. Put that on the list of questions I'd love to ask interim athletic director Ryan Passari and anybody who's going to take over. Yeah, I think that's. Absolutely. I think the SHI needs to be improved. They had at one point $25 million to improve the rack. The former athletic director is trying to build a new arena. I have no idea where any of that stands. I don't think they know where it stands, to be honest with you. Right. And I think they're probably more worried about the stuff we just talked about, right. $20 million, getting that money, figuring out how you could just distribute it to athletes. I mean, there are some pressing things that are happening behind the scenes. How you're going to adapt to this new world, these contracts to go to there's so many different things that are happening all around college sports that I'm guessing the manpower hours are spent dedicating to that is moving stuff like, wider concourses, more bathrooms, better, improvements to the stadium. What do you think?
I totally agree. And I think that's the right approach, right? Like the philosophical changes that are coming to college sports and understanding like what this world is going to be is obviously been going on behind the scenes for years. And just think about this specific anecdote, right? Last year, the big talk was that, when Greg Shannon was hired, we need this beautiful $200 million practice facility, right? That was the big priority in the contract dispute, right? Well, what happens to that? The money that was going towards that, right? It went back into the pot to retain players and get players and NIL, right? So it just shows you what the priority of the athletic department and specifically the football program is at this point, right? Like It's not going to be getting leather seats at SHI Stadium. It's going to be about how can you best position this program and the student athletes for success moving forward.
Listen, people dog us all the time for writing about the deficit. And that's why it's important in this conversation. Where's the money coming from? I mean, they're paying an offensive coordinator practically $2 million. They're paying their head coach, whatever, $5-6 million. They're going to pay a defensive coordinator $1.5 at least, right? They're not going to pay him less than what Joe Harris-Simiak was making. They're paying a head basketball coach the 20th best salary in the country. They're paying an associate head coach an absurd $700,000 salary with a $100,000 retention bonus. Where's the money coming from?
And that deficit includes $11 million in debt payments on previous improvements, I believe, something like that. That number. So there's already money.
They're still paying a mortgage for other buildings for 20 years. 25 years you're paying debt off that, and you want to build a new facility and new programs. Just be happy you have a program at this point. I mean, the money they're spending. And again, I get why people get upset why we write about the deficit, but this is why it matters. I mean, money isn't real. It's 0.3% of the budget, whatever. Fine.
But it makes it harder to do this stuff. Absolutely. It makes it harder to do what we're talking about. Sure. If you were Michigan, you think about you have a $50 million surplus and all of a sudden you build a field hockey building, people are like, oh, okay. No. I mean, it's true. Or you fire a coach, you give a coach a raise, like they just did with Kirk Shiraka. You're like, oh, okay. But when you're $70 million in the hole, people are like, oh, all right, yeah. So that is a great point.
Penn State's rebuilding their press box. They also just made the national semifinals and probably make millions of dollars every year off football.
Yeah. The Penn State press box was a disgrace, though. So that's a good thing. All right, this is the last question. This is the best question that we have ever gotten for the podcast. I hope you guys are ready for this. Hope you guys have a good answer because someone really thought about this from the Discord. I wish I put down the name. I did not, but here you go. Ready? Is it true that there are roughly 50 million kangaroos worldwide and there are 9 million people in New Jersey? So if there was an instance where all the kangaroos invaded New Jersey, each individual New Jerseyan would have to fight off about 6 kangaroos. I don't know if we could do it. This is the comment. Red, distinct. Now, I think there's some things we don't know here in the kangaroo invasion. Like where, I guess, are they spreading it out? Like, are the kangaroos going to different, like, I don't know if you guys read Dawn, remember that movie where they parachute in the different parts of the country when the Russians invaded? That's another movie you haven't seen. I wish you guys would, I'm going to have to give you a list. Or are they coming into one area? Like, I think if they got, like here in Montclair where I live, I think if the kangaroos came, it would be over. We'd put down, the kangaroos they would take over this the same way, the Panzer tanks rolled into Poland. There'd be absolutely no resistance whatsoever. But if the kangaroos went to like some places in South Jersey, well, those people, I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I was just there.
You were just there.
I was just down there in Bridgeton for a fun story.
But they went to Newark. If they went to streets in Newark, you think, I don't know. There's some places where people are a little tougher than where I live. What do you guys think? Can we take the kangaroos?
Well, we have this bustling athletic department in New Brunswick and the Piscataway, Middlesex County area that has superb athletes that would be able to lead the charge in this fight. I think that would be a great priority for this defense, and B, something to build morale around the campus and the athletic program. So yeah, I think overall though, it would be tough. It would be tough.
The numbers are hard, and here's what I would say: instead of fighting, how about we try to cooperate? Do you think these kangaroos could play left tackle, maybe center? You could get them a nice little NIL contract, and I know they have short arms, but they do have a high leap. So maybe they can block some shots. I mean, it'd be really hard to block a guy at left tackle, but they're athletic. They jump around. That's what I would say.
It's a mistake that they make in all movies. You can't negotiate. Like they come off the spaceship and all that. You can't maybe they're here in peace. The kangaroos are not coming here to be our friends. If they come here, they're not coming here to play. I could see Greg Shannon like, oh, get him a tight end because there'd be a kangaroo before you know it. Be like, oh, this guy, it's got a big vertical leap.
A little field goal block. They jump high, right? So they can jump up in Tomoko Ture every field goal.
Basketball team would be playing some big game at the rack and he'd be like, this just in, Greg Schiano has signed Bouncy McStru from Melbourne.
I was going to say, not to make an Aussie joke, but I mean, they do have great field hockey down there as well. Beyond rugby and all those things, great field hockey. So it'd be a great thing at the Lanny household too. We would probably welcome the Kangaroos. I'll be honest.
All right, gun to your head. You're taking the Kangaroos.
Kids would love it.
You're taking the New Jersey. You're taking the Kangaroos. Who are you taking?
We're an asylum household in at the Lanny household. We're taking in any baby kangaroo that needs help.
If Greg did sign a kangaroo, he'd be a punter. I just realized they're Australian. And two, I think the Kangaroos' sheer numbers would just dominate, and we'd turn New Jersey into Melbourne West.
It seems hard. It would seem hard to 50 million. It's tough numbers. All right, thanks for that question. It was really, we needed a little levity here on the Rutgers Rant. All right, what else? I will say the what else part. We've got some good news at the end of this podcast. Wrestling wins. Scott Goodell, Gatorade Shower beating Illinois, which was another wrestling program that's very good apparently, but top 10 win, the first since January 11th, 2019 against Wisconsin. Wow.
Fascinating.
What else you got? Wow.
This is a really solid program that's built from the ground up. But no, it's a long time coming for this Rutgers wrestling program. And you could just kind of feel the relief kind of being taken off the back of this program. Like after being so close so many times, like to finally just say, all right, we beat a top 10 ranked team was something. Illinois was ranked number 10. It climbed up the polls after beating number 6 Mizzou, which was a very solid win for Illinois. But it's still not that Big Ten program that you're like, oh man, Rutgers just knocked off, Iowa but here's the good news. Rutgers will wrestle at number 8 Minnesota on Sunday. And that's going to be a much bigger task for Rutgers to win that than beating Illinois. Rutgers and Illinois were so close, and it obviously played out in that match exactly as everyone expected. When it came down to criteria and heavyweight, Yaroslav Slavkuski had to win that bout, and then to tie the score and send it to the tie-breaking criteria, which was most match points. Rutgers came out on top there. So it was just so fascinating, really intriguing. If you were there at the rack either night this weekend, it was great from everything that I heard. Obviously, Rutgers wrestled Penn State, one of the best teams maybe in the history of the NCAA wrestling, the lineup they have, and actually competed decently well if you look at the results up and down. And so really good stuff. And if you want something to look forward to as a Rutgers fan, tune into this duel on Sunday against Minnesota, because Rutgers is right there. And if it beats Minnesota, it'll be a very, very big deal. Especially
2 wrestling questions. Sorry, Pat. 2 wrestling questions. Does this mean that Rutgers is now the top team in that second tier below Minnesota, Iowa, Penn State? I don't know how Ohio State.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because Michigan is a team that's in that top tier like all the time. Michigan is a great program, but they're having such a down year that Rutgers has a shot to be amongst the top 5 teams in the conference this year, because Michigan is not. So if you want to talk about the tiers, they're there. There's no doubt about it. The rankings will reflect that. And of course, at the end of the year, when we get to March, it'll be about potentially having one of the best postseasons it could possibly have. Will it have a national champion? I don't know, but it could have the most All-Americans on this roster that it's ever had. So I think there's a lot to look forward to for Rutgers wrestling.
People were curious about Bo, the enigmatic recruit. He was at the meet Friday. What do you think? Where is Rutgers in this whole thing? Rutgers
is really well positioned. Everything that's going on behind the scenes, the Rutgers has a great connection to this recruit. We talked about Bo Bassett on a podcast many months ago, and it was like this whole thing. Like he's narrowing his recruiting list school by school, like from like 55 down to 6. Rutgers is in there with everyone. So I don't want to jump into the inner heads of this sensational recruit, probably one of the best that Rutgers would ever have, if not right. Like Soriano and Ashnalt are one level. This kid's right there. There's no question. But he's a Pennsylvania kid. All indication is that people are expecting him to go to Penn State, but he may want to be different. And he has a great connection to Rutgers through assistant coach Steve Middich. Maybe money talks. I don't know. But if money does talk, that's not going to be a good thing for Rutgers either way. It's fascinating. He was there for the Penn State match. It was great. So Rutgers has a shot. That's all I'm going to say. Rutgers has a shot. And if Rutgers gets Bo Bassett, it would be one of the bigger stories of the year for Rutgers, right up there with the basketball recruits, if you wanted to put them on a sort of like level playing field. Obviously, it's different sports, but in terms of pure talent and big time recruits, that would be huge.
Any idea when he's going to make his decision?
I gotta read up on that, to be honest.
Yeah, but so that doesn't have to be in the next week. It's going to be they're going to drag it on a little bit. Okay. That's my fault. Right. Yeah.
If you beat Penn State for an elite recruit, you're essentially beating, like, this is the greatest juggernaut in the sport, right? And you can tell me I'm wrong, but maybe ever, right? So if you're an elite wrestler and you don't pick Penn State, I'm probably scratching my head because they have the money, they have the resources, they have the greatest coach in the history of college wrestling, probably at this point.
It'd just be fascinating because I like just the whole scope of like scholastic wrestling, right? What is this kid one of the better ones of all time? Yeah, there's no question about it. But like, there wasn't media attention on college wrestling recruiting 30 years ago or anything like that. So it's really interesting.
Here's a way to beat Penn State.
These anecdotes wouldn't even have been shared 10 years ago, right? So
maybe someone should just show him Penn State. That's what I would do if I was Scott Goodale. I would, instead of a recruiting visit to New Brunswick, I'd take him to State College. You really want to go here? I just say that to make friends who are angry at Rutgers Rant. See, Polity hates Penn State too. All right. Women's basketball, women's hoops come back over Penn State. I thought they might go 0-18 in the Big Ten. They're not. They're at least going to go 1-17. A big win for them. That's all I know. What do you guys got?
It was a great comeback too. Yeah.
Comeback. Yeah.
Coquise Washington revenge game. Back to her old she used to be the head coach.
That's right. Good point.
Yeah. You showed some resilience, some fight. You're down 17 deep into the third quarter. The season is pretty much going nowhere, right? So very easily they could have just thrown in the towel. They come back using that full court press that C. Vivian Stringer made famous, and they had a pretty exciting celebration in the locker room. I think it's a huge relief for everyone to not go over.
Right. Other news: Chris Ash to Notre Dame as defensive coordinator. I don't know if that's actually happening or if that is just a report, but he reported really strongly by a reputable source. Has not broken yet that I've seen officially. I mean, good for him. He's a guy. That's what he did well. I mean, there's no sign he was a very good defensive coordinator. He'll have incredible talent. They've got money up the wazoo after going to the national championship game there. You would think that he would excel there. Meticulous planning, football guy in a good position. Where he failed at Rutgers was in everything not related to that. But what do you guys think? Would that be a good hire for Notre Dame?
Yeah. Championship pedigree. Literally won a national title at Ohio State in this exact role. And he probably, I don't know if Ohio State or Notre Dame makes coordinators talk every week like some programs do. But if they don't, this is the perfect situation where Chris Ash has to do nothing but sit in a film room, coach defense, and not be a front-facing guy, right? Marcus Freeman has enough charisma for his entire coaching staff. Let him do all that stuff, hole up in a room, coach the team, much like Kirk Straka, right? Kirk Straka is a similar deal, right? He's a guy who just loves football, sits in a room, coaches the team, doesn't have to talk to anybody. This is a perfect situation for Chris Ash. And Notre Dame is positioned to compete for another national title. If he's on the team that breaks that drought, I mean, his reputation will be saved. He'll have 2 national titles as a defensive coordinator. And yeah, sure, he had one of the worst head coaching stints in the history of college football, but 2 national titles.
Yeah.
I think Rutgers fans are rooting for him too, by the way.
Oh, they should. Why not?
And here's another New Jersey connection, right? Look at what Al Golden did at Notre Dame, or what Notre Dame did for Al Golden, right? Here's a guy that had a great football trajectory, resume, done a great job, had walked into some bizarre situations at Miami, right? And it was just kind of the perfect fit for him for both sides of Notre Dame. Look what happened. Now he's the defensive coordinator, Cincinnati Bengals, I think, right? Hired him. So yeah, I think it would be not only a great public-facing opportunity for Chris Ash to have a similar career resurgence, the way that Al Golden had that there.
51 weeks from now, it'll be Chris Ash's Notre Dame defense versus Kyle Flood's Texas offense for the national championship. Could you talk about heads exploding? Would that be enough to get me to that game? Could you imagine? Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine being Chris Ash at the podium, national championship game. You're ready to talk about the Irish. You look up and you see Steve Politi. What did I do in a past life to deal with this?
Just curious, are you thinking about Rutgers at all? As you try to, could you imagine? And I could just stay in the room and I could Kyle Flood in the back end. Good question, Coach Flood. Do you reflect on your time?
Yeah, exactly. You head over to Kyle Flood. Yeah, exactly. Oh man, I would be praying for this to happen.
Mm.
Which also brings us to like another interesting topic of like how do people receive credit from the outside perspective? Like the whole Ryan Day situation rehashed again as we hit an hour here. Like, what is the outside public perception? How much does it really even matter? Right? Like,
you mean with Chris Ash getting hired?
Yeah. How things are evaluated publicly or privately is what the point I'm trying to make.
I mean, to your point, Notre Dame fans are melting down about this hire. They're pulling up Chris Ash's Wikipedia page and screenshotting his Rutgers tenure. And they're like, no, what are we doing? I think Notre Dame people, Marcus Freeman was an Ohio State alum. I'm sure he watched Ohio State during Chris Ash's tenure, watched them revamp that defense. And he's a smart guy, right? So I think you're right? Like, I think what matters ultimately is, can the guy coach defense? The answer is yes. Yeah. Even on that bad team, the defense was, I don't know if you can call it a strength because it wasn't particularly good, but it was the least bad part.
Absolutely. They won a few games because of defense. That was the only, they didn't win it because of offense. That's for sure. So yeah.
You got to feel good for him, right? Steve, you spent a dinner with him in Las Vegas back in February during the Super Bowl. You kind of got a sense talking to the.
I did, yes. I did, absolutely. And I got the sense that he was in a better place, that he learned a lot from what happened at Rutgers. The NFL thing didn't go the way he thought, but he's a lot like Greg Schiano. He went to the NFL level, took some things away from that, was did a lot for the Raiders before he got fired there. Then he went down to Jacksonville and then worked in the the GM's office. So he has some experience on that side of it too, which helps. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any reason that if you dislike Chris Ash, you're taking the results more seriously than the human being. I think he was a good guy. He's still a good guy, and I really enjoyed the dinner. I thought he said the right things about it. Like, he wasn't saying, oh, we just didn't get the right research, we didn't get this, we didn't have this. He said, no, I failed at Rutgers. We didn't get a job done. We did, I made some mistakes. I think that's kind of what you wanted to hear from him. He put it in his rearview mirror and moving on to the next stage of his career. And I hope he gets it, because I think he'd do a good job there. I think it'd be fascinating for all of us to watch back here in Jersey.
To be clear, he didn't bring up the GPA. First time at Rutgers.
Bringing it all around. It didn't come up, oddly enough. No. But when you think about this, like, if you go back, and this is another tie-in, go back and look at those reports, the money reports on what Rutgers was spending on football for Chris Ash's first couple of years compared to what they're spending now. Just food for thought. All right, let's sign off. We'll
What about Isaiah Pacheco? Really quick, Isaiah Pacheco back in the Super Bowl to become the first team to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls, and they would all happen while he's on the team. It would be unbelievable. Does that make him the greatest NFL Scarlet Knight of all time, purely on team accomplishments? Because I don't think anyone's even remotely close.
I think who is the offensive lineman who's got 3 Super Bowl wins, right? We did this chart.
Aaron Swain?
Yes.
Yeah.
We did this chart. I mean, but obviously.
Devin McCourty too, obviously. But to win 3 in a row in your first 3 years in the NFL?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Let's just talk about, I mean, how much of, and look, he's earned it. Wasn't a great year. He had injuries early on. But yeah, you could see like they're a different team with him out there. Had a great run, could help clinch the win yesterday. That matters. And he soaks that stuff up. He'll be at the podium talking Rutgers. He wrote that column after 2 Super Bowl wins. Someone else will write it this year. I'm not going to the Super Bowl this time around. But yeah, I mean, he is, he obviously one of the best representatives of that program. When they ask him to do stuff like, hey, Pop, can you mention Rutgers? Can wear a Rutgers sweatshirt? He does it. Right. And I think that matters for the young recruits to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question.
He does it without being asked, right? He'll wear it just because he wants to, because he loves Rutgers, which again is that's another positive. I will say I'm happy for Pop being in the Super Bowl again. I am sick and tired of watching the Chiefs and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and I'm sick of the Eagles. I would have done anything for a Commanders-Bills Super Bowl where I hope everyone wins. This time, I hope everyone loses and the NFL takes a year off and recalibrates its priorities.
On that note, hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Groundhog's Day edition of the Rutgers Rant. I don't know when we'll be back, but we'll be back eventually, hopefully to talk about something else. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.